when it starts to go wrong, stop saying, "Oh my God, it's going to be one of those days," because when you study NLP and the way the brain works, what you're basically doing is setting that as your expectation for the day.
Power to Live More with Joe Dodds.
Welcome to the Power to Live More podcast, all about productivity, organisation, well-being, energy and resilience. I'm Jo Dodds, and I started this show to enable interesting people to share their stories about how they use their power to live more, and by that I mean to do the stuff that they want to do more than the stuff that they need to or should do. It's about creating a life for yourself where you have the energy, health and space to be happy and fulfilled, spending your time as you'd like, whether that be at work, home or somewhere else entirely. That's your choice.
Hello. My name is Ellie Dodds and I'm co-presenter, and today Jo's interviewing Pam Burrows. Pam was introduced to us by Jackie Handy from show number 173. Pam has been helping teams stress less and perform better for 30 years and has been awarded a European Health and Safety Award for reducing stress in the workplace. She is a qualified nursery nurse, social worker and a Master Practitioner in Neurolinguistic Programming, NLP. She delivers a host of techniques to empower positive behaviour change and increase well-being. Pam is an inspiring, energising facilitator and is a fellow of the Professional Speaking Association. She's often seen wearing a tutu, just for fun, and is known for being sparkly on the inside and the outside. Her customers include Tetra Pak, Nottingham City Homes, Nottinghamshire Headteachers, Pendragon, Nottingham Uni Business School, Motorola Solutions and the Scottish Government. Back to the studio.
Today I'm interviewing Pam Burrows, People Booster. Welcome Pam, thanks for joining me.
You're very welcome. It's delightful to be here.
Lovely. So start by telling us who you are, what you do and crucially where you do it.
So I'm Pam Burrows, People Booster. So I help organisations to reduce stress. I do that on a strategic level and on an individual level, teaching people techniques to feel more calm and more confident. I usually do that from my base in Nottingham, but of course at the moment I do it online.
Yes, as do many of us. We were just talking about how things have changed considerably in terms of just things like being used to talking on videos all the time and so on. So my podcast's quite retro now because we don't use video. So tell us a bit about how that all came about. Stress and helping organisations and people to reduce that is really topical, but it's not something that's sort of been talked about in those terms for many years. How did you get into this?
I've been a speaker in one way or another, and I've always been fascinated throughout that time in personal development. So the whole thing about how we drive ourselves crazy and how not to do that has always been a fascination. So over the years I've kind of narrowed down, and in the speaking world people always say you've got to have a niche, or if you're in America you've got to have a niche. And then for me the thing that I found I most readily was drawn towards was the whole issue of burnout. And I've had a few incidences myself of getting very close to the edge and becoming utterly frazzled. In one situation, it was because I was driving 4 hours each day, every day, and then working in safeguarding whilst I was at work. So it was all a bit too much. And so I found that I was helping more and more people who were in a similar situation. And I think in any coaching kind of role, coaching, teaching, training, whatever it might be, I think it's always easiest to find good content and get people drawn to that if you've got something in common. So I find I get a an audience of people who do too much and don't look after themselves properly is pretty much the headline of my typical customers. And ironically, well, not ironically even really, I think just it makes perfect sense that a lot of the people that I talk to, because they want me to come in to train their team, they are HR or they're health and safety. They're all about making sure everybody else is okay. And while we're talking about what I'm going to do for the team or the whole organization, it transpires that they're not okay either. They're kind of doing too much and not resting enough, not looking after themselves, whilst telling everybody else to do that. And so it just became more and more of a fascination of mine to help people understand how we get to that point. Like, why on earth do we do so much, and why don't we look after ourselves? And then how to put that in place, especially for people who say, I'm too busy to rest.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And how did you sort of turn that into a business? It's something that I think is of real interest to many people going through their own journeys with their businesses. How you have an interest, you have experience, you have sort of strategies and tools and all that sort of thing that you use, perhaps with yourself, as you said, sort of packaging that up to then deliver to other people is quite often the bit that people get stuck with. And I know a few podcasts ago, I talked to Heather Waring, who has made a business out of walking, which at the time, one of the questions to her was, how on earth do you do that? But It's a bit like, I always think with things like reducing stress, we all know we need to do it, as you said. Organisations are willing to pay for it, but what is it? I mean, how do you sort of, as I say, package it up? I think it's a really sort of interesting process to share with people who are looking at running their own businesses as well. So where did it come from? We know why you do it. How did you sort of turn it into something you could make money out of, I suppose, is the short question.
Okay, so I was a bit the other way round compared to Heather, in that I was already speaking and training. I've been running my own business for 21 years. I've just had my 21st birthday in September.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much.
You can do whatever, I don't know, you can't do anything special when you're 21 anymore, can you?
No, it's all a bit meh these days. And so I've been doing it a long time and just kind of honed what it is that I offer. So for instance, 21 years ago when I first set up, I determined to write down absolutely everything that I could train people in, because by that time I'd worked both in local authorities, in the private sector. I'd done lots and lots of kind of public sector training, but also sales negotiations and account management. So I've got this huge wide range of stuff that I could teach people the skills in. Yeah. And so I wrote this huge long list that I used to print out and give to people to encourage them to buy my business, to buy me in, and of course realized that you just look like jack of all trades, and people are overfaced and they can't find you because there's no expertise that they're of just what they're looking for. So over the years I've kind of narrowed it down, and so how I package it now is well, I'm sure you've had people on about marketing and sales, but the broad brush of that is, I talk about what is it that people are having a problem with right now, and then how I solve that problem and what that will mean for them if those problems are solved. But the actual stuff that I do, so I'm a qualified nursery nurse, which means that I studied child development and human behaviour. I'm a qualified social worker, so did all the kind of psychology around that. And then I became a Master Practitioner in NLP, Neurolinguistic Programming. So what all of that does is the individual stuff that I teach, which is, here's how to change the way that you feel in the moment. So you're feeling absolutely overwhelmed or desperate or anxious or depressed or whatever. So I've got some things immediately people can use in that moment to feel better. And then over time I realized that in terms of the business side of it, that's all well and good, but if what I do is I go in and I'm just speaking to individuals, there's a limit to the impact that I can have. So then I started to self-study things like health and safety and documents that the health and safety executive in the UK and Ireland produce, which is they're getting really good now at recognizing stress as a risk in the workplace rather than, you know, hazardous chemicals and falling off a ladder and those kinds of things, which is kind of what we imagine when we think of health and safety. I started studying all of that, and I kind of realized that a lot of organisations, they're a bit knee-jerk when there's an issue of stress in the workplace, whereas actually they can be really strategic about it, and they can have policies, procedures, assessments and ways of supporting staff that's much more proactive and preventative. So so I help the organisation to do that, and a lot of my work comes from people who are in health and safety, but they are very much the hazardous chemicals and falling off a ladder people. And they're like, well, I don't really know where to start if actually we're talking about what they call psychosocial risk in the workplace. And then so they say, how can we do that, Pam? And I go, funny you should say that. That's where I can help you. But it's almost like by stealth, because I do that stuff and it's good stuff. But it's not what I love. What I love is we put all the strategies in place, and then we start doing the workshops that teach people how to manage their own stress and behaviours and whatever. And that's what lights me up, because I see them light up, and I just love doing that stuff. Because I'm sort of thinking, preventative on trips, slips and falls, or whatever the thinking back to my rudimentary health and safety training many years ago, would be things like, putting signs up and making sure you've got your paperwork and having your orange, things that you put in the way of water so people don't walk on it and all that sort of stuff. That's all the sort of, practical stuff. But then it's like the culture of how do you stop people spilling the water in the first place, and how do you change the procedures and everything else. And I guess that's, as you say, the sort of the bit where you're then working with people. But how do you that bit you said about, often people are employing you to deliver something to the staff when they're suffering just as much, and probably are part of the problem, because they're probably, delegating too much, or the processes aren't right, or as an organisation there's a whole sort of productivity type thing that's causing stress as well. How it feels like the bit you just said is like the sort of the easy to do, and I know it's not easy, but as in its structures, it's sort of ticking boxes, it's having a process, but then the rest of it is all very much driven by individual behaviours and then company culture. I guess that's the joy of it, the fact that it's so sophisticated. But simplify it for us. Well, that is where it has to start, really. It is about the culture, and it's how you shift that. So, for instance, one of the things that we put in place in most organisations where I do the strategic stuff is that we, or rather they, start doing assessments on the roles in the organisation. So not the individual person, so not Jo whilst she's doing her podcast, but someone who is doing a podcast. What's the risks in terms of stress around that? So as an example, you might look at the fact that there's going to be quite a lot of adrenaline going on, so that might be stressful to you, and how do you manage the adrenaline of a live show, or live recordings, those kinds of things. There's the if you're talking about difficult issues, then there might be an emotional impact on you if somebody shares something that's quite traumatic. So you'd look at that role, and there would be an assessment on that. And like any other assessment, whether it's a trailing wire or a dodgy light bulb, you then say, and what will we do about that? So what action will we take? So they do an assessment on every role. And one organisation that I worked with had a lot of, this was before the pandemic, they had a lot of people working remotely, some of whom were in a different country on a permanent basis to their manager. So they had very little sense of support that somebody had got their back. There was no kind of just catching up while the kettle's boiling in the office. There was very little of that sense of support. And so that was a stress risk in that particular role because they hadn't got the support that they needed. So then they have to, as an organisation, start changing. If they're buying me in and asked me to do this, then they have to. It's pointless to invest in that time and finances to then not do the thing that will actually make the difference, which is, right, how do we get that person more support? How do we help somebody unwind after a podcast? How do we, so how do you actually tackle that risk and lessen it? And how do you skill people up so that when they're taking on that role new, that they're ready for the role? They've got the tools in the toolkit for the potential stresses in that role. So that's the key thing, really, that starts to shift the culture and the way that people talk about stuff. And what I find mostly is once we're in there and every single person is expected to come on one of the workshops, then people start to realize that this isn't about, there's a few people with mental health issues and, or there are some people who are particularly sensitive and they have to be careful. It's about everybody.
Yes. Yeah. And what about the sort of current situation with the pandemic? Obviously, remote working suddenly became a thing. I'd sort of say how we used to talk so much about the future of work, and all of a sudden, the next day, the future of work was here. And, there's been a lot of talk about, mental health generally, the fact that, this has been remote working during a crisis, not just normal remote working. This has involved homeschooling and God knows what else as well. How's it changed what you do, bearing in mind you're working remotely as well, but also, as we know, there are lots of organisations who are working with their people remotely who never did it before. They hadn't even thought about how that would play out. And everyone's got a different situation as well. So, we often, when I'm talking about employee engagement issues and talk about treating people individually, we know some people, I've had a lockdown that's been fine, appeals to my hermit nature, and I've got a nice house and space to work and everything else, but not everyone's in that privileged position, and that causes its own issue, never mind any of the stuff about being connected with work and everything else. So what have you seen change for you since that started?
Well, in March my work pretty much disappeared overnight because it was in-person training and conferences, and I started to talk to existing customers about how they were going to go online for their continuing professional development and some immediate help around stress and stuff. So a couple of them asked me to do online courses that were recorded with resources and stuff that people could tap into as and when they wanted to. And some of them, we did some live broadcast workshops that were interactive and dealing directly with what people were experiencing. So then the other side of that was, what is it that people were experiencing? Well, there were people who were living alone, who were very lonely and feeling a little bit desperate. There were people who weren't living alone, but were equally frustrated and desperate because of the people
they were living with. Yeah.
And on that health and safety thing, people who were working in a way which was really bad for their posture and and their physical well-being because they hadn't got the facilities to sit comfortably and do what it was that they were doing. But also it's much harder to regulate the working day. So there still is a huge problem with people blending their home and work life. So maybe at lunchtime they empty the washing machine and hang the washing out. So then they think, oh well, I'll need to work a bit harder later on, and they work into the evening, or they're still checking their emails via their phone whilst they're supposedly relaxing and watching television. And that blurring between home and work is a real problem because there are more people than you might imagine who are actually working more hours than they're getting paid for. You know, you'd think, oh, people are at home, you know, a lot of them are going to be skiving off, they'll just do the bare minimum. Actually, that isn't my experience. What I find is people are working too hard for too long, and even if it's a bit here and a bit there, there isn't a chunk of time in the week where they just completely switch off. And that's a huge thing in terms of working with stress. Is that you need to properly switch off for a good chunk of time, not just half an hour here or there, and have at least a day a week where there's no work at all, and you're just using your brain, different parts of your brain, and really kind of replenishing all of that energy you've been using.
It's interesting you say that. A couple of things. I have moments and days and weeks sometimes where I'm feeling sort of overwhelmed, and I've kept reminding myself how I need to be intentional about what I'm doing. As in, I have a really flexible schedule, and I work late into the night, and then I sleep in the morning, and I potter around in the mornings, generally not doing much in the way of work. And sometimes I get all guilty about that and think I should be working, and then I have to remind myself that I work at night when everyone else is probably pottering around. And so I've had to be really intentional about being in the moment and remembering, you know, in the moment that this is what I need to be doing now, rather than worrying about what I haven't done, you know, elsewhere, if you like. But it's interesting as well. You've just reminded me, years and years ago, I worked in retail. That was my first career, and I worked in retail before Sunday trading, and because I am that old. And I worked in stores for the first 5 years of being an HR manager, and then I moved to our head office, and we worked Monday to Friday. And I immediately noticed how much more effective my Sundays, my weekends, particularly my Sundays, were than they'd been when I worked in store, because obviously I was on sort of varying shifts, but we'd started to work Sundays. So then it became that when I'm not explaining this well, but when the store was shut, there was no chance you could be contacted about anything other than maybe a break-in or something, which generally wasn't my responsibility. But there was nothing. Whereas when I went to so when I went to head office, that's why I noticed it, and at stores just on Sundays. But then when Sunday trading came in, and I moved to another retailer, and I was back in operational stuff again, no day was a day where I couldn't be contacted about something, even if it was my day off, because of the fact that the store was trading. And it was a really interesting sort of contrast to understand the difference between having a day off when something could still come to you, and having a day off when nothing is going to come to you. It's really interesting, that proper rest, isn't it?
Proper switch off. I worked, there was one of the global corporates that I worked with, and there was a senior manager there who was experiencing burnout. And when we kind of unpacked what was happening, because it was a global organization, of course, the time zones are different. So people are emailing you at different times of day and expecting a reply. And when we kind of looked at what was happening for her, I said, you know, at one point in the conversation, I said, there's got to be a time soon where you switch off completely and have a week or even 2 weeks away, just completely away. And she said, I recently did have a break. I said, how did that go? And she said, I had to shift the flight because there was a meeting that happened as an emergency. So I had to fly a day later than I was going to, so that I could do this meeting. And I did take my laptop with me, and I did hook into a few conference calls whilst I was on holiday. I was like, oh my God, you know, it's like there is no point at which you are absolutely switched off, you know, and so it's not surprising. I sometimes use the example of a story I read about when the Twin Towers first fell. They had dogs who were finding people who were still alive in the wreckage. And these dogs were getting used as emotional support dogs, kind of by accident, really. So people who were there grieving were holding the dogs and wailing and crying and whatever. And every 2 hours, you could see the energy of these dogs being depleted. So every 2 hours, it was absolutely rigid. After 2 hours, the dogs weren't allowed to work anymore. They were taken to the park. They'd roll about, chase each other, catch balls, just be like whoop-de-doop. And they'd come back, spring in their step, tails wagging, ready for the next shift.
Yeah.
And it just struck me. I was thinking, how long do we go on without just rolling around in the park? We just carry on and on and on. And then we get so tired, but we're not actually physically tired. It's an emotional, psychological tired that we just go flat out, maybe a glass of wine, maybe dinner, maybe television, because we feel so tired. And actually what we need to do is we need to shake off all that tension, all that kind of soaked up trauma and stress that we've been experiencing. Because often what people find when they do a bit of physical exercise at the end of a day like that, you actually find, a bit more energized now. How did that happen? I was really tired. Now I feel less tired, but I just did something. And so I think that's the problem. If we don't properly switch off, we get, I know we're only on audio here, but I'm rolling my shoulders, curving my back, kind of, slumped head. The whole body posture tells you everything you need to know about how that kind of heaviness starts to affect us.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's something, we're talking in general terms about sort of corporate home workers and so on, but this is something that is a real issue for home-based coaches and consultants, people like us as well, in that how do you sort of finish the day? How do you not just keep working? And like I was saying, how do you not worry about 5 million things that you still haven't done whilst you're trying to, I don't know, cook your tea or whatever? How do you switch off? How do you make sure there's that? I think you said integration before when we were talking about home workers. I don't use work-life balance because I think it isn't a balance, and it can't be a balance because you've got to step up at different times with different things. So I think it's integration. How do you make that happen for you, and what tips have you got for other business owners?
So I keep an eye on my diary. If I ever open my diary to put something new in and my heart sinks, I know there's too much in my diary. There's a feeling in the pit of my stomach that I get when I'm putting something in that I know when I get to that actual day, I will really curse myself for having squeezed too much in. So I try to notice that. I also have my electronic diary is color coded, and I put things that are joyful and that are like the dogs going to the park. I put those in yellow so I can see at a glance if there's a week without any yellow in it. And if that's the case, then I'll, even if I just plan a bonfire in the garden or dance like a twit in my lounge, or something to just kind of shake it all off.
Yes. Can I just ask you a question? Why is it whenever anyone says joyful, I always want to finish it with "and triumphant"? Do you think I do too many carols at Christmas? Carry on.
Why not indeed? I have a friend who I don't know if you saw the jacket potato song, the baked potato song that was viral early in lockdown. So she and her family have got this habit now of any time anybody says thank you, they go baked potato, and she can't help but doing it even when she's with a customer, and it just make me smile. I love those little catchphrases you get stuck in.
Exactly.
So what was the question?
So joyful, that was joyful and triumphant. In your diary, yellow things. Yeah. What else?
So the model that I use when I'm doing my workshops is something that I honed over my own experience and my own learning over that time. And I found that there were kind of four main areas of life where we go wrong and therefore burn out. And if we get it right, then we're enhancing our well-being, our confidence, our joy for life in general. And over time, I developed those into an acronym, which is CARE, CARE. And so here's how it goes, just very quickly. This is normally done in a whole day's workshop. So this shows how bright you are that you're going to get it in 30 seconds. So the C stands for compassion, and that's not necessarily to other people, because most people are quite good at that. It's compassion towards yourself, because that's one of the things that can lead to burnout, where you're beating yourself up for not having done enough or not done it well enough or whatever. So C is for compassion being kind in your mind, and giving yourself the kind of encouragement you probably give to other people all the time. The A is for acknowledgement, and this speaks right to exactly what you were saying there, Joe, about how do you end the day. The best way to end your day is checking all the things that you've done, even the things that were for somebody else that you weren't planning on squeezing in, the little things that were things you'd have to do anyway, like hanging out the washing, or putting more oil in the car, whatever it might be. So acknowledge all the things that were good about that day. And if you do it at the end of the day, just before you go to sleep, and you jot it down in a diary, in a little notebook, you will sleep better and more, because you change the chemicals in your brain when you start to acknowledge the good stuff, rather than looking at all the things you didn't get around to. The R is for reality, and this is basically about time management. So if you're saying yes to too many things, it's about looking what's the reality. So somebody asks you to do something, and instead of your intention to be helpful, answering the question, reality needs to answer the question. And we get blurred between our intention to be a good person and try and fix things, and the reality. Have you actually got the resources, the time, the patience, the energy to do what's being asked of you? So R is for reality, and not trying to get 2 pints into a pint pot. And then the E is for energy, which is to eat, rest and hydrate in the appropriate amounts at the appropriate time. So something you said about, hang on, what's the right thing right now? What do I actually need right now? It seems like there's another job to do, but I'm hungry and I need the loo and I need some fresh air. I need to stretch. And, what do you actually need in that moment? And then the other thing is those yellow bits in the diary. For energy, you have to have joy. What are the joyful things? And we have to do that more on purpose right now, don't we? It doesn't happen by accident or spontaneously. We have to do joy on purpose. So think about, what do you love to do? Maybe something you haven't done for ages, or something that you meant to do but it fell off the list because it didn't matter to anybody else. So making sure those are in the diary.
I think it's interesting, that on purpose thing. One thing I noticed as we were sort of halfway through lockdown was that the things that I used to do on purpose to create that joy and take me away from the working thing tended to be stuff that involved me leaving the house, and that's not because I need to leave the house, but it was a good way of stopping me working. So it was things like going to choir, playing netball, perhaps going to see my friend, because I couldn't physically work during any of those things, and I hadn't fully realised how much of the shape of my week was driven by me creating scenarios where I couldn't work. Because then when they went away, I found myself, working all the time. And so I've had to build other things. I never really watch telly. I haven't in the past. I never used to. And now I've ended up with a blinking Netflix addiction. I find myself one of those series. I'm watching one at the moment. If you like nice programs, it's called Heartland. It's about horses, and I was really overjoyed the other day to look and see that actually there's 10 series and I'm only on series 2. But it's really funny that I might still faff around and do work whilst I'm watching it, but actually it's given me something that stops me doing proper work, if you like, and I've just taken up knitting sometimes while I do it. I sound like a right old granny, but it's interesting because I have had to intentionally create things that I do at home that stop me working, because otherwise, I guess I fill the vacuum. And so that's one of the things that sort of lockdown showed me, but not to begin with. And obviously I worked far too much at the beginning when everyone else was swanning around learning languages and knitting yogurt, and as I call it.
No, I think you're absolutely right. It's putting it in on purpose. And I was saying this, I have a Facebook group called the Feel Good Club, and I was saying it in there the other day that set it up. So I'm trying to take a walk every day, and I know that there will be days when I'm busy and I don't take a walk, and I've got loads of reasons why I haven't taken a walk, But those reasons pale into insignificance when you weigh them up against how much better my mental health, not just my physical health, will be if I take a walk, even just for a few minutes every single day. And so what I'm doing is I'm setting up meetings with friends. We're going to have a socially distanced walk together, a walk and a catch up, instead of having a Zoom or a phone call. And because that's involving somebody else, then I know it's more likely to happen.
Yes, yeah.
And I try and do yoga every day, and I've joined a new Facebook group, which is people who are trying to do yoga every single day without fail, and then sharing what class did you do. It's from a particular yoga teacher online, and so I'm scrolling through my Facebook first thing, which I wish I didn't do, but there you go. Not beating myself up. I'm scrolling through and thinking, I'll just have another half an hour with a cup of tea, and I'll come across these people saying, "Oh, I'm so glad I did my yoga this morning." I'm like, "Oh yes, right, I'm going to go do my yoga." So it's about setting up a positive conspiracy, having your fitness clothes at the end of the bed, so when you wake up in the morning, it's the first thing you think of putting on. Having people that you've agreed things with, so you go do those things together. Having, you can even set your computer up to not be able to do certain things at certain times, so that you have to go off and do something else. So I think you've got to do stuff on purpose, because if we just go with the flow right now, it's really easy for a lot of people to feel like it's the weekend every day, and it doesn't matter whether I've brushed my teeth, and that
the postman delivered a parcel earlier, and I walked to the door and went da-da, and he went, "That's about 2 days in a row, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, I look really scruffy, but at least they're not pajamas." I am famous for answering the door in my pajamas, which I think is not a bad thing, because I intentionally keep them on sometimes, but it is getting a bit of a joke. I think it's so much about sort of self-awareness, because again, one of the things I've done recently, at the beginning of lockdown, I picked up a sort of coaching role for a client where I've got sort of 13 students. I don't speak to them every week, but the majority of them I do. And I remember back again to my retail days where I had a whole day of interviews. I used to hate that day when I could see it in my diary. I hate having things in my diary. So I'd have this whole day of things lined up. Then I'd get there, I'd have a brilliant day, I'd love the people, I'd have great chats with everyone, and I'd have really enjoyed the day, but I always dreaded it because it was a full day scheduled in my diary. And I noticed that when I started coaching at the beginning of this, sort of March time, the same thing, that I was dreading every day because I had things in my diary. And so I had to remind myself that that's, what I'm like, and that I enjoy it when I do it, but I don't like having it in there. So what I've decided to do, and I've now actively done, is I've corralled everything into these 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and I have absolutely packed days, like back-to-back meetings all day, and I'm knackered at the end of it. And I dread the days, but I love the days. But then I also know that apart from my networking on a Monday, I've got the rest of the 4 days of the week to swan around doing the work I want to do when I want to do it. Without any appointments in my diary. But it took me like the whole of lockdown, so we're in September now, nearly in October. It took me all that time to sort of work that out and make it work for me. So I think it is really about individual awareness, and then acting accordingly as well.
Yeah, realising what's going to help, because often you look at what other people are doing, you think, oh, why aren't I that disciplined, or why aren't I that organised, or why aren't I the person who can just do that without thinking about it? Actually, we're all different. So what do you need that's going to help you do the things that are important to you? And if that is about having a clear day, like I am so joyful. I said to my girlfriend Annie the other day, I said, do you know what, my perfect moment in time is where I've just had a day where I've been totally useful. I've felt like I'm doing my purpose, like I've got a buzz from what I'm giving out into the world, and feeling like I've achieved something, which is that acknowledge again. You get a burst of serotonin, which is that success hormone, and makes us feel really good. And that the next day is completely blank in my diary. That is my perfect.
Thursday night, 9 o'clock for me.
Yeah. And so, it's about having this, going back to what we said earlier on, having at least one day, preferably more, where you probably will be busy, but you'll do what you want when you want. And there's nothing actually planned in. It can be a complete pajama, Netflix, popcorn kind of day, should you want it to be. It's just knowing that you've got that space, which it's how it's meant to be, really. But we've got this 21st century busy habit that gets away.
Yeah, because I do quite a lot of work on occasions at weekends, and then I feel like I shouldn't, and I certainly shouldn't tell anyone, because I teach productivity and things like that, and self-care and everything else. But then the reason I do it is because nobody's demanding anything of me, because it's a weekend and no one else is expecting me to be doing anything, so I can just do what I like. And the fact that sometimes it involves work is just by the by. So it's interesting.
And I think the trick with that, Jo, is that, and you mentioned this earlier, where you take your time off in lieu, just the same as you would if you were employed. So you are taking that time at some point. But I totally get it. Sometimes I'll do some work on a Saturday because it feels joyful. It's like there's this free space, and I'm like, if I did that piece of work, I'll feel really relaxed about the following week, because I'm kind of ahead of the game and it's going to do me loads of good. But I make sure that there is some other time, perhaps in the week, where I have that Saturday morning in lieu, and I get that switch off time, because I've written a book called Burnout Buster, and one of the things in there is, what I've done is 33 red flags that suggest you might be heading for burnout. And one of them is, but I love what I do, and I don't really notice how hard I'm working because I love what I do, and I do this all the time. I'm like, but I'm enjoying it. I know it's Saturday, or I know it's Sunday, or I know it's Tuesday at midnight, but I love what I do. And that's great. But there still is this balance that needs to be had, where you might love it, but it doesn't mean you should be doing it all of the time to the detriment of your own health, So
exactly.
It's about that.
I think I've got a bit of a check and balance here, because my husband works from home now, and it will be permanent. The company have decided that since lockdown, and he's very much, I was going to say 9 to 5. It's not necessarily always that, because he ends up doing discretion. But it's pretty much 9 to 5. I've almost got that contrast, so that if I'm playing my piano at 10 o'clock in the morning, not that I'm often up by 10 o'clock in the morning, mind you, if I'm playing my piano, I feel like a certain level of indulgence because he's working. Even though I might be working, at 11 o'clock or on Saturday or whatever. So I think I have enough of a contrast against his working schedule to make sure I get it right. So
and then giving yourself permission to enjoy that, because what you don't want to be doing is playing the piano feeling guilty. You want to be playing the piano feeling fab. Exactly.
If only my piano playing was better. Eh? So let's move a bit into sort of technology side of things. And maybe there's some stuff here around the reducing stress as well. What are sort of tools and apps are you using? Is there anything that you'd recommend in terms of helping with this stuff?
I know a lot of people like there's a Calm app and Headspace. They're two great things. I think they both have free levels, but paying a little bit into those gives you a lot more to go at, and that can be a way of keeping tabs on whether you're looking after yourself or not. But I'm all for free stuff. I've got loads and loads of stuff on YouTube completely for free. I've got a playlist for how exercises to activities to switch off your brain at night, so you don't lie there thinking about what you could have done and didn't get around to, and all of those things. And what else? So yoga classes. I think everybody should have yoga on prescription. Yoga is just the bestest thing. I think what a lot of people think is, yoga is all slow and calm and it would drive me crazy, or I'm not flexible enough. You have to get into a pretzel position. And actually, if you just think of yoga as stretching your body in the way that is comfortable for your body to release any of the tension that you've been holding on to, then that's all it is, really. And the great thing online is that nobody can see you. So I do a live yoga class with a friend of mine who's local, but who's doing it online currently.
Yes, you want to give her a shout out? You mentioned her already. So
yes. So her company is Yoga Nova. and yoganova.com. And she's now doing in-person classes, but she live streams at the same time. And so you choose whether you buy an in-person or an online ticket. But what she does is a mix of, we kind of do meditation and chanting and all the kind of woo-woo kind of yoga, but it's fundamentally Kundalini yoga. She plays dance music while she's doing it, and it's just great energy. You know, if you think yoga is all a bit fluffy, then Kundalini yoga is a great way. And the way that Emily does it is with the dance music. That's her particular thing. Then that's really great. Yeah. And just doing something that is right for you. So it might be dancing like a lunatic in your own lounge. You know, just doing things that are good for you, and not thinking it's got to be. Don't beat yourself up that it has to be every day. Give yourself compassion, kindness in your mind. What is it you want to do, when you want to do it? Maybe if you are a bit lax at making things happen, make a friend who's, you're going to do some stuff together. Maybe just on a WhatsApp video, you're going to have a disco together of a Friday evening or whatever. Do the things that suit you, and find it out there. It's all out there, but you've got to make it happen. It's
great to hear about the yoga, because we talk a lot about the lockdown and what restrictions that sort of created, but actually that's a prime example of a whole load of stuff that has happened for the positive. She's created a whole new way of developing her business. People who, as you say, don't want to go to classes and be in front of people have taken up things like yoga. I was just reflecting on my mother-in-law who got into the old what's his name, the guy who broke his arm.
Oh, Joe Wicks,
that was it. At the beginning of lockdown, and I haven't checked this week, but certainly a few weeks ago she admitted she's been doing it every day, sometimes twice a day ever since, and she didn't used to do stuff like that at all before. Even though she could have at any time done online exercise classes, but it never even crossed her mind. But because of what happened, she got into it, and she's done it every day since she's 77. What a great thing for her to have picked up as a habit as a result of the lockdown. So what about yourself and learning and improving? Clearly things develop all the time. You've shared some great resources today. How do you keep yourself sort of learning and finding new things?
Well, I'm part of the Professional Speaking Association. In fact, I'm regional president of the East Midlands region, which is very exciting. Yeah. And so being part of it's national, but then we're connected globally to other speaking associations. So it's an international community of people who speak for a living, and we're just about to have our national conference next week, online, of course. So that's a great way to keep me topped up with both my the speaking side of things, but also my content. And I'm just constantly reading, really. I've got the huge stack of books that you're trying to wade your way through. It helps that I'm absolutely fascinated with my subject. So, neuroscience and, just the whole workings of the brain and human behavior. So I'm constantly reading and listening to audio books to keep myself going. But that's another thing I use YouTube for. I'll just, because I've watched certain videos on YouTube and I'm subscribed to certain channels, when I open YouTube, it'll just randomly suggest a video on recovering from trauma, let's say, or why the brain does X. I'm like, oh yes, I'll have a look at that then. So I do it randomly as well, and it's a fun way to do it rather than today I'm going to learn something new. Yeah.
Exactly. It's funny, actually, you just reminded me. I mentioned I've been working with a load of students. It's around internet marketing type stuff, and one of the things we're doing is setting up YouTube channels for them. And of course, that happens. We go into their YouTube or their Gmail account connected to their YouTube, and all these random things pop up. And I'm always thinking, I keep a straight face and don't respond. But there was one guy, actually, the guy I was with, we were laughing because we didn't know why it had popped up at all. It was like someone like Dave and Debbie, and there were all these like hearts on it and stuff. I'm thinking, I don't know what they're teaching, but I'm not sure I want to see it. So yeah, it did strike me that actually sharing our YouTube channel in front of people may not be what we want to do sometimes. Oh dear. So last couple of questions. So what about those days where it all goes horribly wrong? How do you deal with those days?
Okay, so when it starts to go wrong, stop saying, "Oh my God, it's going to be one of those days," because when you study NLP and the way the brain works, what you're basically doing is setting that as your expectation for the day. So when it starts to go wrong, take a deep breath. Create a pause, a kind of a lacuna. Did you know it's called a lacuna when you put 3 dots in a sentence?
Oh, I didn't know that's what it was called. I do know it's only
go.
3 dots that we're supposed to use grammatically. I didn't know the rule, but I didn't know what it was called.
Yes. So you can't. 2 and 4 is wrong. 3 is right, and it's called a lacuna. So create a lacuna in your day. You take a breath. Take a pause and be like, I can do this. I can handle this. Whatever's gone wrong, I've sorted stuff in the past. Recognize your own. And this is where the care model comes in, because if you're practicing your acknowledgement, the A for acknowledgement, you will constantly have a store of, yes, I can do this because I did such and such yesterday, and I can cope because last week I had that disaster and I found my way through it. Yeah. So you're acknowledging all the time, which helps you to realize your strength, your talents, your resilience. And then the important thing to do towards the end of that day is, again, start to acknowledge what you have achieved rather than the disasters that happened or the things that weren't so good. But the biggest thing to do at the end of a day like that is have a good shake. Pretend you're a Labrador that's just come out of the stream and is having a darn good shake. It's the fastest way to shake off the tension of the day. And if you, I recommend Taylor Swift, Shake It Off. You can put that on YouTube. Yeah. And just shake the whole body. You flap your hands, kick your feet, wiggle your bum, shake it off. I've got a video on it on YouTube, actually. And then just sit for a moment or two, taking some nice long deep breaths. You will be amazed at the power of just that one technique alone. So when it's all hit the fan, recognize what you did achieve, what did go well, and then shake everything else off.
Brilliant. So that will be in the show notes, that video, don't you worry. And finally, those days where you get to live more, and that's where I say you get to do more of the things that you want to do and less of the stuff that you don't want to do. What do those days look like for you?
Oh, shed. I have a shed which is not allowed to have any gardening tools in it. It's a sofa and fairy lights and actually, yes, which is where I will be hosting my online spa retreat.
We didn't talk about that. Tell us more about that.
Yes, we're going to talk about that, weren't we?
Yes.
So yeah, my shed is full of fairy lights and bunting and a beautiful Victorian sofa, and basically I get people to come online on a Zoom call and they have a virtual spa. Well, it's a real spa, but it's just where they are, not where I am. Yeah. So we put our feet in a bucket of nice smelling soapy water, and we do a foot spa, then we do foot reflexology, hand reflexology. I teach them how to massage the tension out of their shoulders and how to ease the tension in the head, neck and shoulders to help you to sleep better and prevent headaches. We do a creative, we do a visualization where you're on a Maldives beach. I've got a video, you're on a Maldives beach, and we do a relaxation so you feel like you've had a little virtual holiday. And we talk about the psychology and the science of stress and relaxation so that people understand the fundamentals. But it's a very interactive experience, and it lasts for 2 hours with a little break in between. And it's loads of fun. And people, the last one I ran, somebody said that she had her best night's sleep in her life ever that she can remember. So a couple of hours. And so tonight and Saturday I'm doing 2 free ones. I do them for organizations, but I'm doing 2 free ones for people that have been working through lockdown and frazzled HR people and teachers and health service people, social workers, anybody who's been completely up against it through lockdown, and they're all joining me.
Oh, I'm so glad you got that in. We had discussed it over email when we were working out timings for recording this, and then I'd completely forgotten about it. So lovely to hear all that detail.
Yeah.
It just sounds so amazing. So we were talking about what you'd do if you were living more. So you'd be in your shed. Is that what you'd be doing, or other things in addition?
I'd be in my shed. I'd be writing. That's one of the things I really love to do. And I'd probably have a bonfire going on. And my girlfriend's just learnt how to make bread. So I'd probably be eating warm bread and butter.
Oh, that all sounds lovely. Brilliant. It's been so lovely interviewing you, Pam. In fact, we said before we came on that 2 separate guests of mine had recommended you. So they were absolutely right in their recommendations. So thank you so much. Tell people how they can find out more about you and get in touch.
Okay, so the best thing to do to keep in regular contact is if you go to my website, which is pamburrows.com, and at the bottom of every page there's a sign up for my Monday motivation message. So every Monday morning at 6 a.m. I'll send you a little ditty by email. It'll be the one email every single week, guaranteed to be doing nothing but nice things, not asking you to do anything but look after yourself. So that'd be the best way, and you will be able to hear, if you sign up for that, you'll hear when the next free online spa retreat is going to happen. And as I say, find me on YouTube. Loads of free stuff. Pam Burrows People Booster on YouTube. And I've just tonight I will be launching my Patreon site, which is very exciting. So if you haven't found Patreon yet, it's a place where you can subscribe to people for a small, medium, or large amount of money each month to get content that is exclusive that you can't get elsewhere. So find me on patreon.com/Pam Burrows, and that's launching tonight, so you're not meant to know about it yet.
But this won't be going out till November, so we'll be fine.
Oh yes, good point.
That is so cool as well, because I think you're my first guest in 185 interviews to say that you have a Patreon account. So if you're listening to this and you haven't checked out Patreon, go and have a look. You'll find loads of people that you know on there anyway, doing different things and stuff, but go and check out Pam.
Lovely, thank you.
For you. Lovely, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
All this information is available in the show notes. If you go to powertolivemore.com / in this case 185, then you'll find them there. And this week I just want to ask that if you enjoyed the podcast, please would you consider sharing it with somebody else. I've been running the podcast now for I don't know how many years. I think Ellie was 8 when we started. Obviously, we've got 185 shows published. I've got another, I think, 8 in the bag, and probably about another 12 interviews to do as well. So I think I'm pretty booked up until the middle of next year at the moment. So I'm not going anywhere. The podcast is going to go over the 200 mark shortly, and we'll sort of continue on from there. And I've just got some really great guests. I've done 3 interviews today, and I just really enjoyed them, and I just want to get this out to more people. So it's aimed at home-based coaches and consultants, who are the people that I work with, but as an employee engagement consultant as well myself, I feel sure that some of the listeners are leaders in organisations, and there's certainly some useful content for them at times as well, because that's sort of the nature of how I ask the questions of some of my guests as well. So, if you know anyone who loves podcasts and is interested in people and interested in productivity and well-being, and about how people get started in business and what they do and why they do what they do, then I'd really love it if you could share the podcast. You just can send them to the website, powertolivemore.com, or they can go to any of the podcast places, so Apple Podcasts, what else? Spotify and all the other places. In fact, you can even listen to the podcast on your Alexa if you add the skill on your settings on your phone. And once it's added, you just need to ask Alexa to play the Power to Live More podcast, and it will happen. So please share if you feel able. Thank you. And again, the show notes for this week are at powertolivemore.com /185, and we look forward to speaking to you next week.
Use your power to live more.